and then we'll have a nice section at the end for questions and answers. And I hope everybody will have their questions ready for our speakers. So I'm handing over now.
All right, thank you. I should be able to share my screen, so let me just try to set that up really quickly. Oh, let's see.
Did you want me to share mine instead?
You might have to.
Okay.
Doesn't look like it's gonna let me.
Guess my
All right.
Where's it going away?
Thank you. So to introduce myself, my name is Dr. Jeniffer Cruz. I am a school psychologist, a nationally certified school psychologist, as well as a New Jersey school psychologist. I currently serve as the school-based coordinator at the Youth Development Clinic of Newark, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. And I'm here with my colleague, Mario Menjiva, who's one of our clinicians who provide services both at our clinic site and in the school setting. So today, our presentation is about recognizing signs of mental health distress in youth. So much of our focus of the presentation today is going to be helping you to identify when there may be concerns about your child's mental health, or if you're noticing anything that seems to be different and what you should be looking out for. And then this is kind of part one of our presentation series. And our second presentation will be about more strategy focused and what you can do when you notice these signs and what you can do at home and how you can refer your children. So just a little bit about the Youth Development Clinic of Newark. We're located in downtown Newark, and our services consist of individual and family therapy. We work with a variety of different children and adolescents of different cultural and linguistic backgrounds, and we also provide school-based counseling throughout numerous schools in Newark. A lot of our work is focused on helping a variety of different needs, whether that's anxiety, depression, behavioral or emotional concerns, as well as trauma-focused work. Okay. So I'm going to go over our learning objectives for the presentation today. We're also going to do a welcome activity, which Mario will walk you through. And then we're going to go through some statistics about mental health and mental health in youth, as well as how mental health impacts our overall well-being and academic achievement for our kids. And then the bulk of the presentation will focus on common conditions that we see in children and adolescents and what their symptoms look like. And we'll briefly go over the content of our next presentation, and then we'll leave time for questions and discussion. So after this presentation, we hope that participants will be able to describe the impact of mental health on overall well-being, as well as academic achievement in youth. We're going to hopefully be able to provide you with knowledge about describing the impact of COVID-19 on mental health, and what consequences we've seen thus far after 2 years into the pandemic. And then hopefully participants will be able to identify some common signs and symptoms of mental health conditions and disorders that we see often in children and adolescents.
So for our welcome activity, we chose, well, we technically have two. This is our first one. We chose something called Share That Emotion, which some teachers tend to use in the classroom as a start of the day activity. So it's a very simple activity. Basically, we talk about what we're feeling at that present moment. It provides information on each individual and what each student tends to carry, and a teacher or adult can set the tone for the day based on what sort of emotion they're sharing. For the parents in this presentation, This can be used as an after-school activity at home, simply to gauge where your child is at the end of their school day, depending on, what they've gone through, what they've experienced that day. Um, so because it is a welcome activity, I will share my emotions and my feelings. I have two. So through most of the day, I'm going to be very candid with you. I've been feeling rather anxious because presentations are not my favorite thing to do, but I know it's something that comes along with the job. And I can absolutely, without certainty, with no hesitation, tell you that I'm feeling more relief now, simply because once you're in the middle of a presentation, at least for me, it just runs through you and you go right through it. So for me, it was anxiety, and now it's relief. Um, so maybe I'd like to hear from some of you, and maybe some of the parents on what you've been carrying throughout this day. I realize I can't see the chat, so someone's gonna have to tell me if anyone's writing in chat.
I'm monitoring the chat. Nothing so far. Please feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand if you want to share your feelings.
Dr. Cruz is excited.
So I've been feeling very anxious and stressed all day just because of the sheer amount of back-to-back Zoom meetings and trying to coordinate things, and my mind is all over the place. So I feel like a little frazzled. But, like you, I think once everything is settling down and this is the last activity of the day, then now I'm feeling a little bit more relaxed and ready for the evening.
Okay. Thank you for that. Miss Green asked if I can talk a little bit more about how this wheel works. Yes. Oh, so I guess I didn't explain the wheel, and I apologize for that. This is something that we use in therapy called an emotions wheel. This was a really more specific emotions wheel. If you look at the center, there are very common feelings or emotions that we might experience. Something along the lines of school-age children might describe: feeling angry, feeling surprised, feeling happy, feeling bad, feeling sad. As you go into the middle circle, these words get more specific. These feelings get more specific. So if we look at the fearful section, someone in middle school might say, "I'm feeling scared over the situation," or "I'm feeling anxious about the situation." "I'm feeling insecure," or "I'm feeling rather weak today." And as you go further into the outer circle, they become really, really detailed words. For example, angry. "I'm feeling betrayed." Betrayed is a very specific word when it comes to anger. "I'm feeling resentful of something." Resent is a very specific word. So that's how this wheel works. There are many, many different types of emotion wheels you might find. But I chose this one, I guess, because I like the complexity of it. So that's how this emotion wheel works. Mr. Craig reports that he is feeling relief. It has been a busy, hectic start to the week. I agree with that, sir. And now it feels like I am going to be able to be more flexible with the rest of the week. I feel the same way, Mr. Craig. I feel the same way. um, would anyone else like to share before we move on? Okay.
I'll also just jump in and add that the importance of building an emotion vocabulary is really key for our children. And you starting off with really simple emotions is developmentally appropriate. So if you have really young children, younger than 5 or 6, starting off with a few basic emotions is really good. But then as they continue to get older, we can add more feelings because it allows them to accurately express what it is that they're experiencing. So as Mario was describing, sometimes just saying that they're mad doesn't really give us the whole picture, and it doesn't allow us to help them problem solve or to find coping strategies that work. So really the key is being able to identify before we can take the next step to cope and manage. So kind of starting off really simple is great, and then building up and eventually being able to know all the words on a feeling wheel like this is a goal.
We also have a 2-minute mindfulness activity video for the parents in the presentation. It's something that you can do at home right before bed. I'll play it for you now.
Check out this Verbo.
Oh man. Michael.
Uh-oh.
Fly with Abel and Phi.
Lie in bed and close your eyes. Gently take in a nice, deep breath. Now pretend your tummy is a balloon. Breathe in and let your belly expand like a big giant balloon. Exhale slowly. Do once more and let your body relax completely. Allow your body to fill with relaxation and let yourself sink into your bed. Your legs and arms into the bed and all relaxed. You feel free, calm, and clear. You are at peace. Your mind is totally relaxed. It feels so good. You are ready for wonderful, peaceful sleep tonight. Take in a deep breath now and exhale slowly. With a clear, calm mind, say these words to yourself. I am peaceful and I am happy. I am ready for a good night's sleep.
So we wanted to highlight this video simply because, as we're going to talk today, changes in sleeping habits has been a really big thing, especially now during COVID. But we'll get to that further in. It would be that, it would be in good practice for parents to do this with their kids before going to bed, simply to get them to relax and de-stress and the things that might keep you up at night, try to get them out of their heads, basically. So we're going to segue into what we're going to talk about today, but first we want to talk about what is mental health. And effectively, mental health involves effective functioning in daily activities resulting in productive activities, healthy relationships, and the ability to adapt to change and to cope with adversity. When we talk about effective functioning in productive activities, what motivates us to go to work? What drives us to go to work? What drives us to go to school? How many times have you heard kids say, I don't want to go to school today, but they don't give you a reason. They tell you their stomach hurts or their head hurts or, something's going on. But then slowly you start to realize that the reason they don't want to go to school is because they're having a lot of trouble in school academically. And that's something we'll talk about today also. Building healthy relationships, instead of keeping with toxic relationships that might happen in school. People with effective functioning can build those healthy relationships and say, maybe this is a friendship I don't need in my life. And, that's something I see constantly in class. I see students who probably shouldn't be friends, but they stay friends simply because of the fact that they're there, even though they tend to hurt each other in various different ways. And I don't mean physically, I mean emotionally, mentally, along the lines of that. Adapting to change is one of the big things. You know, when we talk about adapt to change, it could be anything from changing the clothes you wear all the way up to moving out of state and starting over in a different part of the country. Especially for kids, that would be an incredible stress on them because some of them might not be able to handle that change at that very moment. And how do you cope with adversity? Some of us can cope really well with adversity. Some of us can thrive in adversity. And then there are some of us who break down because they broke a crayon in the morning and they don't know how to handle that. So effective functioning. Some of the factors contributing to mental health include biology, genetics, and brain chemistry. Genetics is one of those things we can't change, and you know these are some of the things that we're going to face when dealing with mental health. Life experiences. Life experiences is always a big one. We talk about trauma. What sort of traumatic experiences have some of our kids gone through, or some of us have gone through, that have shaped us to be the person we are today, and how does that affect our mental health? And family history. Family history is also a big one. You know, we talk about generational trauma, trauma that is carried from one generation to the next. How does that affect who we are as a person when our grandparents were raised a certain way and they raised our parents a certain way and they raised us a certain way, and we continue that trend of generational trauma unless we work at trying to get ourselves out of that. Mental health disorders. Mental health disorders or illnesses include health conditions involving changes in emotion, thinking, and behavior. In social and emotional learning, when we do this at the schools, one of the first things we teach our kids is how emotions affect our thinking, which can affect our behavior. And that's also very true for mental health in general. When we're dealing with mental health disorders, how do these disorders or these illnesses change the way we think about our emotions, or how do these disorders change our emotions, which in line change our thinking, which in line affect our behaviors. And some of the examples of some of these mental health disorders include depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, and ADHD. These are some of the more common ones, and we'll talk about a couple of them today. Simply in the sense of, you know, what signs do we see in our students and our kids going forward. And just to start you off with some mental health statistics, one of the most common mental health conditions in the United States is mental illnesses. But here's the thing, some people don't like to recognize that as something that could be affecting them. And one of the things that I do see at schools is some of the students basically stating, there's nothing wrong with me. I have no problem. I don't need to share my feelings. I had a child today during an SEL group tell me he did not want to participate in an SEL group today because he felt he didn't need to share his feelings. If that's the case, I understand. You know, the door is always open to him. But this is one of the more common health conditions affecting us in our country today. More than 50% of the population will be diagnosed with a mental illness or disorder at some point in their lifetime. Think about that. Half of us will most likely be diagnosed, whether it be something fairly simple or something much more encapsulating. 1 in 5 Americans will experience a mental illness in a given year. I wonder, I know these statistics are from 2022, but I also wonder how much COVID has an effect on that going forward. 1 in 25 Americans live with a serious mental illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or major depression. And we wonder, these are people who are diagnosed. What about those who are undiagnosed? Would that number be bigger?
So specifically, given the content of our presentation, we wanted to give you some statistics about mental health and what it looks like in youth. So according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the most common commonly diagnosed mental conditions in children are ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. That's a disorder where children either lose focus really easily, they struggle to pay attention, they may interrupt conversations, they have trouble waiting their turn, they can be disorganized. So that's one of the more common conditions that we see. Anxiety problems, behavioral problems, and depression. And on the right-hand side of our slide here, you'll see the breakdown as far as the percentage of children ages between 5 to 17 who have been diagnosed with these conditions. So for ADHD, we're looking at almost 10%, which is approximately 6 million children and adolescents. And then we have anxiety, which is close behind at 9%, behavioral problems, again, closer to almost 9%, and then depression approximately 4.5%. And we wanted to provide you with these statistics to understand how prevalent it is. And again, given what Mario had just added, that sometimes these are just what have been diagnosed. So you may see concerns come up that sound similar to maybe what your child or someone you know has experienced. And so it could be really important to be able to pick up on what does it look like in a child, in a young child or in a teenager. If they're struggling, what am I noticing that's happening? Because these are really common things that are coming up and affecting our youth.
Jen, there's a question in chat from Mr. Craig. What impact are you seeing on the rise in these conditions having on educators who are seeing these come out in kids every day? What impact are you seeing on the rise in these conditions having on educators who are seeing these come out in kids every day?
I see. So especially with the pandemic and the return to in-person, I've been noticing, at least through my experience, that kids are not knowing how to manage if they're feeling anxious, if they're losing focus and they're getting to the point where they're just walking out of the room. And it's not just one student, it's not just two, but it could be multiple. And I've been noticing a change as far as educators go with how do we manage these in the classroom? And is it a focus of just addressing these one or two students, or do we need to address mental health on a more class-wide, school-wide level? Because we're seeing these increases and changes in behaviors in the classroom, that teachers have been becoming stressed themselves because they also went through this experience. So we're kind of noticing the challenge with managing the increase of these behaviors, and needing more support from support staff to help manage, and identify if a child is struggling. Is it because they're just being defiant and maybe they just don't want to, which sometimes is the case, or is it part of a larger issue? So I know Mario and I have ourselves participated in presentations with teaching staff about how can you identify it in your students, and what can you do for your whole class to help talk about emotions and be open about it, making it normal for them to recognize that it's something we all experience and we can discuss it together. And a couple more statistics here. So at one point in life, 1 in 5 children had or will have a seriously debilitating mental illness. And then particularly in adolescents, so ages 12 to 17 years old, we're seeing the most recent statistics state that 18.8% of students have seriously considered attempting suicide, and then 15.7% have attempted suicide 1 or more times. And again, we're noting because of COVID, which we have some info on that as well, that we're seeing increase is depressive thoughts, concerns about self-harm, suicidal ideation, or the thinking about committing suicide. So there's concerns about these behaviors as well, and just how real this epidemic is, which makes it even more so important for us to address mental health and understanding the signs and symptoms when children are struggling. So to your right, you'll see a chart that breaks down the particular conditions, so depression, anxiety, and behavior disorders. The key thing to note here is that, especially with depression and anxiety, we see the increase of children experiencing these conditions. We see it increasing with age. So as you see the adolescent bar graph here, it says that ages 12 to 17, we're seeing higher rates of depression and anxiety. And if that's the case, we want to intervene sooner rather than later. So when children are young, teaching them coping skills, helping them to identify their emotions, seeking out support, knowing what to do when they feel that way, who they can talk to, what they can do, as well as arming the parents and the teachers with this knowledge as well, so they can have these children be providing them with support, whether that's through mental health referrals or being more open about talking about these conditions. And then again, so we see a lot of these conditions develop in early childhood, but then increase with age. So 1 in 6 US children between the ages of 2 and 8 had been diagnosed with the disorder, and we continue to see these increase.
The impact of mental health on overall well-being. Just one fact to consider: serious mental health illness can reduce life expectancy by 10 to 20 years. Think about that for a second. Those are 10 to 20 years lopped off your life expectancy when dealing with serious mental health illness. Mental health disorders had elevated all-cause mortality risks compared with the general population. So people with mental health disorders had elevated higher mortality risks when compared to the general population who might not suffer from mental health disorders. Several disorders had higher or equal mortality risks when compared to heavy smoking. Smoking, as we know, is bad for you. It's been proven. It's science. It's what it is. And to have that statistics compared to heavy smoking and to have equal mortality risks makes you wonder. Occurrences of heart disease in individuals with anxiety. Then we have asthma in individuals who suffer from depression. Now, when you have individuals who suffer both from anxiety and depression, we're talking about eyesight problems, persistent cough, asthma, hypertension, heart disease, gastrointestinal problems. These are actual, I'm sorry. This graph is not surprising. Some experiences such as challenging behaviors of development of middle schools. I'm sorry, I was reading something that popped up on chat from Tasha. I guess it pertains to the previous graph. The graph is not surprising. Some experiences such as challenging behaviors are developmentally expected for middle school students. And if we think about anxiety associated with the life changes of entering high school, numbers make so much sense. Crisis such as would absolutely result in a spike with these groups. Thank you for sharing the graph. Thank you for that, Tosh. Yeah. So, you know, when we see individuals suffering from both anxiety and depression or any other type of mental illness, there's a definite impact on an overall well-being. Impact of mental health on academic achievement. Multiple studies have indicated that there's a positive relationship between mental health and academic success. A significant relationship found between improvements in mental health and educational outcomes, such as academic skills and attendance. So an improvement in your mental health equates to an improvement in educational outcomes, or gaining better academic skills and even attendance. I had said this earlier before. If a child understands what's going on in the classroom, they're going to want to be in class every day. If a child is having a lot of difficulty understanding what's going on in the classroom, they're going to avoid school at all costs. even if it means getting in trouble. Reciprocal effects between mental health and academic achievement may exist. Mental health predicts future academic achievement, and academic achievement predicts future mental health. Your mental health will suffer if you are in college and you don't understand what's going on and you question what you're doing. Mental health will flourish if you are in school and you understand what's going on, which could lead to better academic success. A reciprocal relationship between the both. Dr. Francis, sure. We also see the experimentation in early addiction pathways form as a result of mental health struggles, and that's actually very true. Based on some of the things we've seen, how the pathway to addiction can start early on, simply as a coping mechanism, which can expand into other reasons why. I agree with that, doctor. Studies also have shown the negative impacts that mental health can have on achievement. Externalizing problems have been associated with poor reading development and math performance. Depression, conduct problems, school liking, and school concerns were significant predictors of future academic achievement for boys. I have a client that I work with, and he's getting up to the age where he's going to have to make a decision on his future. What is it that he wants to do? Does he want to go to college? He's a very exceptional student. I believe his GPA is a 4.2. And I'm not bragging, but that's him bragging. But he has questions about going to college because he has a hard time with change. And he realizes that college is not going to be the same as what high school is now. And even though he is exceptional in his academic achievements, he's questioning about whether he really wants to go to college. You ask his mom, of course I expect him to go to college. Like that's what the plan has been. You ask him, he goes, I don't know if I want to do that. And as we work through whatever it is we need to work through, he's come to realize that, yes, change is part of what life is, but for him, it's incredibly difficult to get adjusted to that. And it scares him. And that's why he has his doubts about whether he really wants to go to college or not. I have a feeling he will. It's just, we have to get him there, basically. Where are we? 16. In an average school of 600 students, more than 1 in 20 young people ages 12 and over report current depression, which among school-aged youth is linked to reduced academic achievement and increased school suspensions. Depression comes out in many various ways, and it's one of those disorders that you might not understand until a child really does open up to you. We'll talk about depression a little bit later on. Only 1/3 of adolescents with mental illness go on to post-secondary education. For the parents who want to see their kids succeed and who expect their kids to go to college and, to get a higher education, only 1/3 will be able to if they have a mental illness. And that's provided they don't get the services or the help that they need.
So again, we wanted to highlight the impacts of COVID-19 and what it has done for mental health. So the list that I have here is for children, but it's really for all of us. We all underwent significant changes, and a lot of different worries and concerns came up over the last 2 years regarding the pandemic, and for many of us, those concerns still exist. So what changes took place that had impacts on mental health? For one, there were increases in worries and fears about getting sick, about loved ones passing away. What will happen if one of us gets sick? And lots of questions that I had fielded from my clients who are between the ages of 8 and 12, where I'm afraid to leave my house because I don't want my parents to get sick, or I don't want to get sick. I don't know what's going to happen, especially when when everyone was still isolated, it was a lot of questions about when will this be over? And that was really challenging for a lot of kids. And that unknown increased a lot of worry. And we saw increases in anxiety from that. Social isolation from peers. So not being able to interact with their classmates, with their friends, and so much of learning, especially in the early and elementary age, and all of that is important on in person to person contact, and a lot of that really made social interactions difficult. And I think the really big piece to this about the impact of COVID-19 is we're still seeing the effects even as children and adolescents are going back into the building. For having that pause and not being able to interact with others, there have been increases in children having social anxiety. They don't really know how to interact with their peers, and especially from some of the younger children. It was maybe their first year in school was kindergarten, and they were coming back for the first time to second grade. So the demands were different. Everything was the expectations they weren't used to, as well as their peers, not seeing them and how they've changed. So that was a huge concern, not feeling like they fit in, not knowing how to, and then changes in everyday routines. So we went from, having starting the day, having a system, going to school, maybe it's walking home, walking to school, everything changed. And then it was, logging on to a Chromebook, or the significant change from the routine, which again can lead some, when you are lacking that interaction, lacking that consistent, what you were used to, had some children really not motivated and not wanting to participate. I know we had a really hard time motivate kids to participate in virtual learning, especially if they already had some difficulties academically. Having them participate was even more so of a struggle. So going back to talking about the impact of mental health and academic achievement, if they were not motivated and felt, isolated, they started to show signs of a depressed mood, then they were not participating in any academic activities. And then missing significant life events. So birthdays, vacations or parties that they were looking forward to, even really life events as far as funerals or being able to grieve lost loved ones. And so much of that was missing. And as for many cultures, having some type of rite of passage or some transition is really important for that process. So for so many individuals, that those pieces were missing, and it was hard to really accept and acknowledge those feelings, because those life events that go along with them couldn't happen. So that took a lot of these things took tolls on mental health. And then kind of feeding off the same thing. So quarantine, self-isolation caused a really significant negative impact on mental health. Just loss of freedom, boredom. There were a lot of concerns, both for kids and adults, about the deterioration in mental health, and how being away from others and interacting with others, having things to do, plans, really took a toll on how hopeful people felt about the future and what was coming next. So we saw significant changes, and I think the key here is what we're still seeing even this far into the pandemic. So this was a list of some of the more common changes that we saw for children's behaviors as a result of COVID-19. So we saw an increase in, again, anxiety, just distress, not having a difficult time coping with change, the social isolation, and then some of our children and adolescents were living in unhealthy environments. So maybe they didn't have access to internet to be able to access school, or they were in situations where there may have been neglect involved. So we saw some of those things as well. And then some of the more common changes in their behaviors were increases in crying, seemingly for no reason, as they just seem to cry more frequently. Increases in sadness, so thinking about not having plans or things changing. A lot of what we noticed was just the change from a child's kind of normal state, like they're typically in a good mood or pretty content, and seeing this shift to they seem to be sadder more often. They seem to be worried more often than they're normal. So a lot of different difficulties with concentration as a result of COVID-19. So being able to sustain attention for a long time was challenging. And one thing I'll note is that feeling anxious or feeling depressed can also lead to attention problems, because if you are feeling anxious, you're worried, you're thinking about other things, it makes it really difficult to pay attention. And I'm sure we can all relate to that idea that if we're upset about something or we have other concerns going on, it makes it hard to attend to what may be on our to-do list that day. A lot of unexpected physical symptoms. So as Mario was mentioning earlier, seeing more aches and pains come up, headaches, stomach aches, just muscle pain, noticing that those feelings were coming through as physical symptoms, which we tend to see in some of our mental health conditions as well. And then changes in eating habits. So whether that's increases in eating. So I know some children that I work with were suddenly feeling like they could never get full. They felt like they were always hungry, which wasn't the case for them. And in contrast, some children kind of not feeling hungry at all, when usually they can eat a couple meals a day and they feel pretty good, to the point where they weren't really hungry anymore. And many of those things can be impacted by our mood. And then there were a few surveys that took place during the pandemic through parents to see what they were noticing about their own children. And in a 2020 survey, 71% of parents said that the pandemic had taken a toll on their child's mental health, and acknowledged that there was some changes in their children as a result of the pandemic. And 69% said that the pandemic was the worst thing that could happen to their child. And maybe some of you have felt that way yourselves and can empathize with these parents. So additionally, we saw changes in emergency room department referrals. So from March to October of 2020, there was a 24% increase for emergency department visits that were mental health related for children ages 5 to 11. And then for the national survey of 3,300 high schools, they found that a third of the students felt unhappy and depressed much more than usual. Mario, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. There's a question from Ms. Green. Will these signs be shared? Yes, that we will share what some of these signs and symptoms are at the end of the presentation, or towards the latter end. Oh, here are some. So one of the more common ones that we find is anxiety. According to the APA, anxiety is the excessive fear or worry at certain times or specific situations. Sometimes feelings of tensions and physical changes are also present. One thing to consider is approximately 4.4 million children between the ages of 3 and 17 have diagnosed anxiety, about 7.1%. some of the signs and symptoms that we see in anxiety is being very afraid to be away from parents or caregivers, especially in younger kids. The extreme fear about an object or a situation in general. Being afraid of being in public places or with other people. Rapid heart rate, shaking and dizziness, sweating, irritability. Trouble sleeping is a huge one. It's something that I've seen in some of my kids who I speak to at school, that they have trouble sleeping. Sleep cycles have been disrupted, because of COVID also. And the inability to relax. I always share this story because I had this experience with one of my clients at the clinic, and it's something that he and I can sometimes reflect on in order to um, see how much progress he's made. When I first started with this child, a couple of years ago, there was one particular session where he was trying to convince me that there was nothing wrong with him and that he was doing okay and that he felt he didn't really need to be in therapy anymore. While he was trying to convince me of this, my client was sweating profusely. And when I mean profusely, he was sweating through his armpits. You could see it coming down his forehead, and it was so noticeable. So I'm sitting there just calmly looking at him, and I ask him, "Are you okay?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. Why do you ask?" And I'm like, "Well, you're sweating in the middle of winter while it's snowing outside, and it's not hot in here." And he had to take a moment to actually wipe his forehead before he realized that I wasn't joking. Um, and, um, it's something that we look back on and we say, hey, this is the progress that you've made. And even he'll say, hey, I realized back then that, yes, I was anxious and I didn't want to admit it, but now I feel like I'm at a place where I can admit that to you. So anxiety is a really funny thing when it comes into play. Depression, excessive sadness or hopelessness that takes place on most days. Um, Around 3.2% of the population have diagnosed depression. And with depression comes obviously the feelings of being sad, of hopelessness, but also the feelings of irritability. There will be some people or some kids who will be very angry. Changes in eating and sleeping patterns, much like we had spoken before. During COVID, there are radical changes in sleeping patterns. Maybe they sleep too much or they sleep too little. Some kids will feel as though they've eaten too much or they eat too much or they don't eat enough. Difficulty paying attention, especially when some of these kids are wondering, why am I depressed? Why am I sad all the time? Why can't I get out of this rut? Like, why is this something that continues to happen? Um, Feeling worthless, useless, or guilty. And unfortunately, depression also can lead to self-injury or self-destructive behavior in order to try to feel something other than what that sadness or that hopelessness is. Dr. Francis also reports that the Poison Control Center has released stats on an increase in suicide and self-harm among youth. And he's provided a link. Thank you so much, Doctor. Stress, the physical or mental response to an external cause. In a survey of individuals between the ages of 5 through 21, 27% report their mental health being fair or poor due to stress. And stress can come from a variety of sources. I talked about my stress today. Especially in school, it can come from teachers, it can come from the classwork, it can come from peers. So we see stress affecting our kids in many different ways. And some of the things we see in them are excessive worry, uneasiness, headache or body pain, and loss of sleep. It seems like loss of sleep and sleep in general being disrupted is very common among all three prevalent disorders that we've been talking about. Some statistics that come with stress that I wanted to share. Just for the record, Gen Z is classified ages 12 and up around the time that this study was done. 35% of the kids felt as though some of the significant some of the significant stress comes from bullying or not getting along with others. Personal debt also comes into play, which you wonder what sort of kid has personal debt, but it might not be their personal debt. It might be something financial going on at home. Housing instability is also a big one for kids, like especially in populations of low income. Like, are we going to be able to stay in the home that we're in? Are we going to be kicked out? Hunger and not getting enough to eat. That's one of the ones that sometimes we don't connect the dots with because we figure we live in the United States and there's no reason people should be going hungry. But this is still something that we face day to day, and especially for some of our kids, going to school and having their school lunch might be similar to having their only meal of the day. Drug and alcohol use or addiction in the family, and dealing with gender issues relating to their sexual orientation and gender identity. Since this data is from 2018, when you compare Generation Z to adults overall, you see that most at that point were concerned about mass shootings. And if you recall, around that time, there were definitely mass shootings, not only in the country, but throughout the world going on. And it just seemed more common than normal. The rise in suicide rates, climate change and global warming, separation and deportation of immigrant and migrant families. I have worked with a subset of children who have been separated from their parents due to immigration purposes or immigration reasons. And of course, widespread sexual harassment and assault reports. And something to consider before we move on into the next slide. Out of the more than 100,000 US clinical psychologists, only about 4,000 are child and adolescent clinicians. The National Association of School Psychologists recommend a ratio of 1 school psychologist per 500 students. The current ratio at the moment is 1 school psychologist per 1,200 students. So we can kind of see that, especially in our schools, we might be lacking some of the resources, mainly because they're not available. And for some of our students, schools might be the only place where they get their services, because they might not be able to get their services outside of school. And just like we saw, the pandemic has also disrupted school-based services, taking away much needed resources from some lower socioeconomic areas of the country. That's something we saw during the pandemic. And, you know, at least at YDC, we tried to work with our schools in order to see the kids that we needed to see virtually. And I will readily admit to you that it was mixed results, because there were certain students that we were able to see on a very consistent basis. But then the ones that we actually needed to reach, the ones that we needed to talk to, wouldn't even come on to participate in class, let alone participate in a session with a mental health professional. Just to answer questions from Stephanie and Mr. Craig about sharing these slides, I believe this presentation is going to be uploaded onto Parent University, and you'll be able to access this presentation and the slides. So, yes.
So Mario described some of the signs and symptoms that we see associated with these conditions, so anxiety and depression and stress. But we wanted to break down a little bit further the signs and symptoms according to each age group, because sometimes they present differently based on the age of the children. So to start, some signs and symptoms that you might see in children under the age of 5, we see sometimes there could be speech difficulties that are actually related to mental health, but it's not necessarily that the child has a speech problem. So one common, or for very young children, a form of anxiety is known as selective mutism, where they don't speak in certain places or certain environments. And that could be a sign of anxiety. So you may see things like that if they were once really chatty and all of a sudden they're now struggling, or they don't want to speak in particular settings. That could be a noteworthy change that could be indicative of a mental health concern. A loss of bladder control, so increases in things like bedwetting or wetting during the day when they hadn't before, especially if they're already potty trained, and then you're seeing this sort of change where they're now during the day or at night wetting the bed more frequently. Changes in appetite, which again is noted for many of the children or who experience things like depressed mood. And then for young children, we see an increase in temper tantrums. So crying, screaming multiple times a day. Lots of clinging behaviors. So not wanting to, really difficult to leave the child alone in the room, having to do a lot of coaxing or to be break. We see those symptoms particularly with children in the preschool age range. All right. So for elementary age children, we see a lot of irritability. So some children may get more defensive than normal. So you ask them questions and they can be a little bit more irritable, less willing to hear you out, may increase in their aggressive behavior. So a child who was pretty mild-mannered you're now seeing them act out and verbally aggressive, so yelling at others, calling other people names, or becoming physically aggressive when they hadn't before. We may see some clinging and some nightmares. Again, significant sleep disturbances, so really difficult to fall asleep. You talk to them the next day and they wake up a ton during the night, can't seem to really get into a deep sleep, and sleep has such a huge impact on our functioning and how we feel physically, but also how we feel emotionally as well. We see more somatic symptoms in elementary school kids, so headaches, stomach aches, but there's also some change as far as you may notice a child who is struggling, they withdraw from peers, or they don't have interest in spending time with friends when they used to, or there's activities that, they played sports like basketball or baseball or football, and all of a sudden it's not something that interests them anymore. That would be a concern. And increase in forgetfulness. So you ask them to do, now, of course, there are some children who need additional reminders based on their age, but this is more of, you see an increase in forgetfulness when you're having to remind your child multiple times when that wasn't necessarily the case before. So that distractibility could be indicative of a bigger problem.
I just wanted to share that there were two comments in chat from Dr. Francis stating that the housing and rent moratorium ends on March 31st in Newark, and some students are now anxious that they can't remain when rent becomes due, going back to living instability. And Lizette asked if a parent is concerned about their child's mental health and seeing the signs of anxiety and depression, how can they go about getting help? We do have a slide for that, and we will talk about that briefly. So, don't feel like we forgot about you.
Okay. And then lastly is just the changes in adolescence. So we continue to see some changes in physical symptoms, a lot of headaches. Sometimes we even see more significant physical changes like rashes, a lot of sleeping in school can be a pretty big sign as well, where they're just not, whether that's because they didn't sleep the night before or just the changes in sleep habit, they're just feeling more tired, more lethargic. We also see this decrease in energy, or there's like an apathy involved. So a lack of caring, or they may say, I don't care, it doesn't matter. When that, again, there's this change in attitude where suddenly they're not really concerned with their own well-being anymore, or the well-being of others, loved ones that they used to really feel a strong need for, but especially that change in that caring for their own well-being. And then, increases in concerns regarding stigma, injustice, and maybe increases in in cutting school or avoiding school, coming to school late, when their attendance used to be, there's this change in their attendance or their tardiness, as well as, again, the isolation from peers and loved ones. Okay. So when, the bulk of this presentation was geared towards helping to outline the signs and symptoms for children and adolescents who may be experiencing concerns. So the biggest recommendation that we have is, if you notice that your child is withdrawing or you see any of these changes, to ask them what is wrong. Sometimes the myth is that if I talk about it or I ask my child about how they feel, it's going to influence and make it worse, as if we talk about, like, are you feeling sad, it's going to make them sad. So the biggest kind of recommendation is to really acknowledge what you're seeing and don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you're still concerned and your child is responding with "I'm okay" or "I'm fine," and they're not really giving you any more, you are seeing the physical changes, the attitude changes, perhaps the changes in eating, the changes in sleep. So if they're not elaborating, continue to ask for further questions, and continue to watch out for any other changes in behavior. And then importantly, if you're not sure, if you're still feeling as though you have questions, so you can always talk to your medical professional, so a pediatrician, who can refer you for services. There are access to mental health services in the schools. So if you reach out to the social worker, or if there's a school psychologist on staff, and you let them know of your concerns, they can also provide resources. There's also several numbers that we can provide along with the presentation, as far as access to a variety of different hotline numbers that you can call if you just have questions, and they can guide you in the right direction. So we can add that alongside this presentation as a flyer, which is something we provide to our families as well. Okay.
So for our next session, we're going to talk about prevention strategies, which is next month, I believe. What you can do at home in order to help your children and your kids at home. When to ask for professional help. And we'll also discuss available resources. Lisette, are there any emergency mental health services for children in case of a crisis? Yes. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I believe Children's Mobile is very good with dealing with emergency mental health services for children. It's a hotline number. You tell them what's going on, and they will see you that day. I believe it's 24 hours a day. I'm not quite sure. It should be. But Children's Mobile is one of the big ones. We can provide you with that number also. Actually, that brings us into what is basically the end of our presentation. Questions or any sort of discussions that we would like to bring up.
Question about the parent. So one of the recommendations is that parents just talk to their kid and, ask them how they're feeling, and, just be really upfront and open about these things. Do you ever, and I know you work in schools and it's alongside parents, so what kind of support are parents given, or do you recommend for parents who aren't comfortable talking with their kids about these things, right? Because I feel like, either whether it's a stigma thing or whether it's just you weren't raised that way, or you have your own barriers, like, are there things that you recommend, or do you work with parents ever to kind of address their own ability to have those conversations?
I will readily admit that I have worked with a specific parent who had difficulties opening up to her son. Her son exhibits some type of oppositional defiance, and he had a tendency of, when finding out something personal, he would use it against mom. And mom readily had told me that, based on some of the trauma she had suffered as a child and as an adolescent, she found it very difficult to open up to individuals, including her son, because he would almost use that sort of intimacy against her. It wasn't until, working with her and going through the benefits of taking the risk of, being open with your son, that she finally was able to do that. And she did it little by little. She was able to share certain things that not happened to her, but along the ways of how difficult it was for her growing up also. And it actually created a stronger bond between the two, because my client had told me before, like, all I want is to be able to talk to my mom. All I want is to be able to share things with her, and I feel like she's not that open with me. So they kind of had to meet each other halfway, because they were both in a very vulnerable state, and it was difficult for both of them. Um, so, in that essence, for some parents, it will be rather difficult. In cases where they might not be um, capable of being able to talk to their kids in terms of emotions and feelings, because there are going to be parents out there who won't be able to. Um, it might be best to seek out professional help. And even as was stated by Ms. Thornton and Dr. Cruz earlier, the fact that the district does have counselors and social workers, and maybe psycho education on emotions and feelings would benefit both, not only the child but the parent also. There was a question from Ms. Park. If you see that a child is clearly struggling with mental health, but the parent refuses help or assistance, do you have suggestions on how to frame the conversation? I sigh heavily at that question, because it's a very difficult path to walk. Um, yes, I have unfortunately dealt with parents who have said, I don't want my son doing this, or I don't want my daughter doing this, or my kids don't need to talk about this. Um, I was told um, I was told about a case, actually, by one of the externs at the clinic, in which guardian did not want anyone talking to their kids, because they didn't want to bring up the fact that mom um, was going through some things, and that she lost custody of the kids, even though the whole point of us dealing with this case was in order for them to process mom losing custody, and everything that came along with it. But she she is adamant that she does not want anyone talking to the kids, and she goes as far as to tell the kids, um, don't cooperate with the therapist, or don't tell them everything. Make sure it's only little things, not details. And that puts a hamper on our job, and what we're trying to accomplish, and the goals that we're trying to reach with them. So as for suggestions, um, we try to explain what the benefits are. And at the end of the day, we're not judgmental. We're not there to change anyone's point of view. We're there to try to help them understand, um, the situation that they're in, the events that followed, and the emotions and the feelings that come along with it. And that's one of the things I try to explain to my parents. Like, I'm not there to talk bad about, what the situation is, or or I'm not there to try to change your perspective. I'm there to try to help you understand, because at the end of the day, you have to formulate your own opinion on what has happened.
Yeah, and I'll jump in too. And I think what I have found with parents who maybe are more hesitant is that um I always try to really understand that, the parents are coming from their own background, and they may have mistrust over mental health professionals, or may have a lack of knowledge about what it actually entails. So I may even start with, you know, curious about, what their concerns are about having their child participate if there's anything that we can do to help kind of illuminate, because sometimes it's based on assumptions that aren't actually true about what mental health is and what rights they have as clients and what we actually aim to do to provide services to children and adolescents and families. And it could be that, the parents would be open to seeking support, outside of just the kids receiving support. So I would do that, and along with Mario, providing the benefits, providing the options, as far as what it actually means. And I know there's another question about the stigma around mental health and if we see it improving. I think anecdotally, I would say yes. I think that there is more talk, and I think a lot of it is driven by school-based services, and if the schools are taking an initiative, which to me it's even Newark Board of Ed holding something like this for parents and families, to me shows that they're taking the initiative to show that this is important, and schools can be the place that really provides positive support for mental health and showing how we can access services and resources. So I think that the conversation is happening more frequently. Of course, stigma does exist, but I'm optimistic. If I hope that answers that question.
Yes, thank you. I was just thinking about, Simone Biles and many other young athletes that have recently spoken out, and even not even athletes. There's also been singers and actors, and I think it's great that they are normalizing struggling and not being okay sometimes.
It's becoming more common, the saying, it's okay to not be okay.
I feel like that's one of the positive things that came out of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Like everybody's kind of people that never experienced these problems or faced depression or anything that now actually have experienced some of it and can empathize and relate. And it's like it's becoming something that everybody can talk about. So we are now at 7:03, and it's always just when the conversation is getting good. This happens, but I really, really appreciate the presentation and the questions and the comments. And if anybody, on this webinar is interested in talking more about these issues, the good thing is that there will be another one. So we will have a chance to reconvene. It's April 6th, the next webinar, and we will continue this conversation. So hopefully we'll have some more people. We did have a little bit of technical difficulties with people logging on, so hopefully we'll solve that next time. But again, thank you so much for being here. We do have a survey we were going to just drop in the chat, but I'm not sure. We'll just do that real quick. If anybody was still on and is not a member of the trust or the Promised Neighborhood, would please fill that out. That would be great. Again, our next webinar is on April 6th at the same time. And we have 2 more after that. So you will have a chance to hear a variety of topics related to mental health, well-being, and safety in schools. So with that, we will drop the survey link in just a second, and then we'll hang up the call. Kim, are you there? All right. Well, never mind. No survey this time, but next time. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.